Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. The Bible is likely the best known book in the world. Its influence has been felt in much of the world for over 2,000 years. Although much of it seems hopelessly outdated and irrelevant, it is still the go-to choice for millions of people when they need some inspiration or just want to feel anchored in something solid. For the Jews, the Bible, of course, is the Old Testament, the 24 books that make up the three sections of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. One of those 24 is the relatively short book of Esther. This is part of the writing section, which are considered to be spiritually inspired books that don't quite reach the level of true prophecy. These books include the Psalms, Proverbs, the Song of Songs, and several others that are either historical or ethical. Esther is definitely of historical nature, but it is unusual in that it covers a period of history that seemingly has nothing to do with the land of Israel and the ultimate fate of the Jews. It is set in the Persian Empire of about 2,400 years ago, towards the end of the biblical period. Israel is never mentioned, nor is the temple, nor any famous words of wisdom, nor for that matter, anything that seems to matter in the grand picture of Judaism. There is something else that doesn't get mentioned in this book that is even stranger for a book of the Bible. God never comes up once in this entire book. While that is not totally unique in the Bible, since the Song of Songs also has no mention of God, it still makes one wonder how a book that makes no mention of God ever made it into the Bible. Nobody denies that the book of Esther is exciting and contains more than its share of drama. But it is difficult to escape the feeling that something is missing here that would normally be expected of a book in the Bible. This week's Parsha is called Tetzaveh, which means you shall command, a reference to the instructions Moshe was to give to the Israelites concerning the design and composition of the priestly garments, which take up almost the entire Parsha. We are not going to go into any of the details of this because the Parsha is somewhat preempted this week by the holiday of Purim. This joyous holiday celebrates the victory of the Jews over certain enemies within the ancient Persian Empire about 2,400 years ago. The heroes of the story are unquestionably Esther, who became queen of the empire early on in the book, and her uncle Mordechai, who really engineered the ultimate Jewish victory. The villain is unquestionably the viceroy of the empire, a man named Haman. The only other significant character in the book is the king, Achashverosh, who seems to go with the flow of things, at first listening to Haman in trying to destroy the Jews, and then later listening to Esther in aiding the Jews. The book reads rather quickly, with something of note happening almost throughout. It goes from a massive banquet, which ends with the previous queen, Vashti, being deposed. After a complex process involving virgins from all over the empire, Achashverosh selects Esther as the next queen. Mordechai has already told her to keep her ancestry a secret, perhaps out of fear that it will come to haunt her someday. Haman gets appointed as the political ruler of the empire and insists that everyone bow down to him. The single rebel against this decree is Mordechai, an act of defiance that made him Haman's mortal enemy and instilled within him the goal of exterminating all of Mordechai's people, the Jews. In the course of defending against this catastrophe, Mordechai tells Esther that she has to play a crucial role in serving her people. She must intervene with the king to annul the decree somehow. At first, Esther is surprisingly reluctant to get involved, saying that nobody could just barge in on the king without being previously called to his presence. Mordechai's response to this is one of the most dramatic statements of the entire book. Quote, "Do not imagine in your mind that of all the Jews you will be saved in the king's house. For if you insist on remaining silent all this time, relief and salvation will arise for the Jews from some other place, and you and your father's house shall be destroyed." Following this odd prediction, Esther agrees to intervene with the king, but insists that Mordechai arrange for all the Jews of the capital fast for 3 days in advance of the fateful meeting. From then on, things happen at a torrid pace. When she approaches the king, he extends his scepter to her and promises her whatever she wishes. She only requests that the king and Haman come to her feast later that day. At that meal, Esther again requests of the king that both he and Haman come to another meal the next day. Haman, believing that things are going splendid for him with these private invitations to royal feasts, goes home to his family and tells them of his elevated status. But he can't get his mind away from his resentment of Mordechai for not bowing down to him. His household tells him to build a high gallows to hang Mordechai upon. With this advice, Haman is able to relax and go to the meal in a good mood. The stage is set. On the night before the meal, the king is unable to sleep, so he asks to hear from a book of events of the empire. It happens that they read to him an incident in which Mordechai saved the king from some plot in the past. Upon finding out that nothing was done to reward Mordechai for this, he commands that Haman place him on a horse and lead him around the city, proclaiming that this is what is done to one whom the king is pleased with. This unexpected humiliation to Haman completely changes Haman's projection of how things are going. His wife and advisors oddly tell him that if Mordechai is indeed a Jew, then Haman is doomed. At the fateful final meal, everything comes to a crescendo. Esther reveals that her people are in mortal danger of a threat to their very existence. When the king asks who is behind this threat, she replies that it is none other than the evil Haman. With this revelation, the king is led to understand that Esther is indeed Jewish, and Haman's decree was a threat to the queen herself. The king then leaves the room in a rage. Haman, in desperation, begs from her to spare him. At that moment, the king returns and finds Haman on the very bed the queen is on, thus sealing his fate. When word gets out of this outrageous behavior, someone comes in to tell the king that Haman had already prepared a gallows to hang Mordechai on. With this news, the king commands that they hang Haman on that tree, and so ends the bad guy of the story. The rest of the book describes how the Jews were allowed to defend themselves against their enemies, both in the capital and in the rest of the empire. Following a great victory, the Jews celebrate throughout the empire. It happens that the victory in the capital was a day later than the rest of the empire, so the celebration is also a day later. This, of course, was to become the annual celebration of Purim, which takes place on the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Adar. An odd quirk of all this is that in cities that were walled at the time of the incident, like the capital was, the celebration takes place one day later. This is why Jews in Jerusalem, perhaps unique in the world, celebrate Purim one day after Jews all over the world. If one is wondering where God is in all this, they would not be alone. There is no question that this victory was seen as miraculous salvation, but it still begs the question. Why would this entire book commemorating this great victory, which has been celebrated for over 2,000 years, leave God out of this story entirely? The common answer to this question is that God is hidden within the story, peering through the cracks, but not ever becoming evident in the usual biblical sense. While this satisfies most who might wonder about this question, it doesn't satisfy all. It seems like a glaring anomaly for a book of the Bible that could have been easily remedied by a few timely insertions of God here and there. Perhaps the answer to this question lies with the completely secular nature of this story. This was a political drama, the likes of which have taken place throughout history. It is also the only book of the Bible that concerns something going on entirely outside of Israel. These two important facts make this a book which represents a completely different genre from the rest of the Bible. This is Judaism in the secular sense. It is about empires and political intrigue and royal feasts and foreign wars. God's role in all this was not meant to be seen in the strict biblical sense of direct intervention. It was behind the scenes, manipulating things in hidden matter that could just as easily have been dismissed as nothing more than politics. But there is that dramatic response of Mordechai to Esther. How did Mordechai know that the Jews would be saved regardless of what Esther did to help out? How did he know that if Esther failed to rise to the moment, that she and her house would be destroyed? There is no answer hinted at in the book itself, but the implied answer is that this was as simple as reading the political landscape is today. Mordechai understood that this was the way things had to work out for the Jews. There would always be salvation coming in one form or another. It may not come about in an expected way, and it may not always happen in a manner that is to everyone's liking, but it would happen somehow. He also understood that one who was in a position to assist in this salvation, but decided to play it safe and not take part, is doomed to oblivion. This is another fact of the reality of the Jewish people. To be a part of this unique and persevering people means to put one's life on the line when the times call for it. Regardless of whether we can see it or not, this is the way that God intervenes in the fate of the Jews, at least in situations that are not the norm for the Bible. Those who believe will find God playing a hidden role and making things work out the way they are supposed to. Those who don't won't see God in any of it. Those who rise to the moment and play their part in Jewish destiny will see doors open up where there was no way out. Those who don't may live in comfort, but they won't get written up in books like the book of Esther. Judaism is a religion that lives and breathes a kind of divinely ordained destiny. Whether we choose to see it or not is up to us. This story, perhaps more than any other in the Bible, makes this point crystal clear. God is hidden between the lines, but emerges in the story if we know where and how to look. Shabbat Shalom and Happy Purim.